It's 5 p.m. here in Lagos, Nigeria. This is The World Today. I'm Joke Rogers. Coming up in the next hour. President Vladimir Zelensky in France joins European leaders for a coalition of the Willing Summit on Ukraine's war. Mexico, Germany respond to U.S. President Donald Trump's announcement to impose 25% tariffs on all imported cars, escalating the global trade war. Plus, at least 6 people feared dead as tourist submarine sinks in Egypt's Red Sea. The World Today starts right now. We begin in Europe, where leaders are currently in discussions on the war in Ukraine in a meeting hosted by French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris. President Macron says European countries will deploy a reassurance force to Ukraine after a peace deal is secured. According to British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, it's clear that Russia is playing games and playing for time. Russia agreed to an energy and infrastructure facility ceasefire, but since then it has hit infrastructure in Ukraine, injuring civilians. This week, Russia agreed to a Black Sea deal which would see a return to trade in the region without attacks from both sides. But soon after news of the agreement, Mr. Starmer says more conditions were added by Moscow. Leaders at the Paris summit, including Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, agree that now is not the time to lift sanctions on Russia. Moscow says a maritime truce in the Black Sea announced on Tuesday would only begin once Western restrictions on Russia's food and fertilizer trade are lifted. However, President Zelensky insists that this isn't part of the ceasefire agreement. For more on this, Mr. Starmer's address at the Paris summit, he's accusing Russian President Vladimir Putin of making hollow promises on a ceasefire in Ukraine. The Prime Minister is co-hosting a summit of allies in Paris to present plans devised by senior military chiefs that seek to deter future Russian aggression against Ukraine, including potentially posting troops there. The so-called coalition of the Willing meeting came hours after its other co-host, French President Emmanuel Macron, suggested a European reassurance force could respond if attacked by Moscow. It follows separate talks between the US, Russia and Ukraine in Saudi Arabia earlier this week, which led to a ceasefire in the Black Sea being agreed. Mr. Starmer told coalition allies that excellent progress had been made during the military chiefs meeting in London last week and that Europe was mobilizing together in pursuit of peace and must keep up the momentum. In the meantime, Russia is accusing Kyiv of being unable to fulfill its agreement, saying Ukraine is preparing for a forceful retention of power in a scenario that would be worse than shooting of people by snipers on the Maidan Square. This is according to Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova. She says this explains the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Law Enforcement's March 21 approval of draft law 10311, which allows the National Guard of Ukraine to use firearms, tear gas and drones against civilians. On March 21, the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Law Enforcement approved the bill. The Anti-Corruption Action Center, commenting on the draft, noted that it gives the authorities unlimited power to use firearms, tear gas, tasers, rubber batons, drones, permits, marking people with paint and the use of other means of influence against the civilian population during protest. The CPC concludes that the amendments proposed in the draft law may lead to violation of the fundamental rights and freedoms of people. And China's UN representative Fu Kong is calling on Europe to play its part in peace in Ukraine and address the root causes as the fighting is on the European soil. This was at the Security Council meeting in New York City on Wednesday, where other global representatives addressed the meeting. Ukraine's Kristina Hayovshin says the UN should focus on Russian actions and not their statements, accusing Moscow of launching drone attacks on civilians, which Russia has previously denied. Meanwhile, Dorothy Shear from the U.S. said that the country commends Ukraine and the Russian Federation for taking the first steps towards a ceasefire, including participating in technical level talks this week. The U.S. held talks in Saudi Arabia with both sides this week, agreeing to a Black Sea ceasefire in addition to the one-on-one energy targets.
China welcomes the agreement reached between the U.S. and Russia on having dialogue and peace talks, and welcomes the recent negotiations between Russia and the U.S. and between Ukraine and the U.S. in Riyadh, where positive progress was made on navigational safety in Black Sea, ceasefire on energy infrastructure, and Russian agricultural and fertilizer exports, among others. As the fighting is on the European soil, Europe ought to play its part for peace, to jointly address the root causes of the crisis.
We should focus on Russian actions and not their statements. And the actions are the following. On night of 1st March, the Russian Federation launched at least 9 Shahed drones on Kharkiv, damaging a hospital with patients inside and injuring at least 7. On night of 3rd March, Russian attack on an eco park near Kharkiv destroyed animal enclosures, a medical center, and a mother and a child house.
And let me open a parenthesis to say that the gall of the Russian Federation in this room today to accuse others of a lack of conscience in the face of such brutality is both unseemly and unconscionable and frankly shameful. For shame, for shame. There can be no impunity for these atrocities. Russia and its leadership must be held fully accountable for waging a war of aggression and for other most serious crimes under international law.
The United States commends Ukraine and the Russian Federation for taking the first steps towards a ceasefire, including participating in technical level talks this week. We welcome the proposed partial ceasefires on strikes against energy infrastructure and in the Black Sea, agreed to in principle by the leaders of both sides. If fully implemented, these agreements will be an important first step on the path to peace. They will protect lives and improve livelihoods, but the first step alone is not enough.
In the meantime, the United Nations says it welcomes reported commitments made in Saudi Arabia between the United States, the Russian Federation, and Ukraine on securing freedom of navigation in the Black Sea. Stefan Dujarric, spokesperson for the UN, says reaching an agreement on freedom of navigation to ensure the protection of civilian vessels and port infrastructure will be a crucial contribution to global food security and supply chains. He also notes that the UN has been working consistently, especially following the letters the Secretary General sent to Presidents Zelensky, Putin, and Erdogan of Turkey on February 7, 2024, which outlined a proposal for safe and free navigation in the Black Sea.
Consistently, especially following the letters, the Secretary General welcomes the discussions and reported commitments reached in Saudi Arabia by the United States, the Russian Federation, and Ukraine. Reaching an agreement on freedom of navigation in the Black Sea to ensure the protection of civilian vessels and port infrastructure will be a crucial contribution to the global food security and supply chains, reflecting the importance of trade routes from both Ukraine and the Russian Federation to global markets. The United Nations has been working consistently, especially following the letters the Secretary General sent to President Zelensky, Putin, and Erdogan on February 7th of 2024, putting forward a proposal for the safe and free navigation in the Black Sea. The United Nations also remains closely engaged in the continued implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding with the Russian Federation on facilitating access of Russian food and fertilizer to global markets to address global food security. The Secretary General's good offices remain available to support all efforts towards peace. The Secretary General reiterates his hope that such efforts will pave the way for a durable ceasefire and contribute to achieving a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace in Ukraine in line with the UN Charter, international law, and relevant UN resolutions, in full respect for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity.
Let's expand this conversation. Joining us now is Ibrahim Babatunde, geopolitical analyst, who joins us from Lagos. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So what do you make of the summit holding in Paris, EU leaders scrambling earnestly to find a solution to the Ukraine war?
I mean, it's a very good initiative that the European leaders have finally decided to step up and take things into their hands. However, there seems to be a lot of infighting and disunity among them. I mean, we've had Macron basically at some point say or come out to say that there needs to be less dependence on the United States in the EU. And you have people like Olaf Scholz, who is the German chancellor, who disagrees with that. So things like this make it kind of obvious that they're still infighting amongst them in the EU. However, it's actually a very good thing they have decided to go in this direction, to look at ways, in order to, help Ukraine and stand by it. Then also when we look at their commitments to helping Ukraine out, you have cases of ammo shortfalls, which means it's kind of right now is a bit difficult for the EU to step up and fill in the void of the United States completely, because even coupled with the United States support, over the past 2 years, they've had a hard time keeping Russia at bay. And now, with limited support from the US, it seems much more difficult that this is going to be able to come to fruition. So now the way forward, as we have seen, is more countries pledging they're pledging resources and other things to help out Ukraine. And as you rightly mentioned, the coalition of the willing might also, like there has been talks of them having boots on ground in Ukraine. Although this is still in the rudimentary stages, but it is a very welcome idea to help Ukraine out in this situation they find themselves in.
Right. So how do you think they can, resolve this infighting, or should I say, how quickly should they resolve the infighting so that they can step up, as we've been saying, the U.S. has really lowered its support?
Yes. So I think a major issue with the infighting has to do with clashing foreign policies, or I would say agendas by different nations. So some have taken a disliking to the way Trump has dealt with European leaders, and they feel like it is time to take a stand against Trump, or at least start, trying to have their own backbone and reduce their reliance or dependence on the US. The problem with this, however, is that they have relied on the US for far too long, and so them just discontinuing that now is going to leave them out in the cold, and so it's difficult to implement. So some, like Macron, are willing to weather this storm, while others feel like it is too early for them to cut off their dependence on the USA. So I think the main crux of this issue is just where they stand on the US and its support. So those who are willing to, take the embarrassment of what Trump has been doing since he got to the White House, and those who will not stand for it. So that is where the crux of the issue is majorly.
Right, and there are commendations, for Moscow and Kyiv alike, that, taking the first steps to a ceasefire, with the U.S. playing mediator role in that. However, Russia is being accused of playing games. We heard that from UK leader Keir Starmer earlier. Can this ceasefire really be achieved, in your opinion?
Yeah, the allegations of playing games always comes to play whenever we have situations like this. If you go even back in time, when you look at conflicts, you always have countries or nations accuse each other of not, being fair or playing playing by fair standards or fair rules. So it is quite common. However, if you look at it from Russia's perspective, Russia is seeing or Russia sees this war as an existential threat, where the whole of NATO is at its front door. Because if you go back in time, you look at the expansion of NATO, Russia has always been complaining as they expanded further. And so by the time they got to Ukraine, it is by their doorstep. And so Russia feels threatened. So when you look at policies of government, they don't tend to deal with emotions or what's right or wrong or what's moral. They tend to look at how their nation will survive. And so this seems to be a major problem for Russia, where it wants to, because of the sanctions and everything. I think Russia is probably the most sanctioned country on earth right now. So it wants to reduce some of those sanctions, ease those sanctions, and get back to at least bring some levity to its situation economically. However, it's also aware of the fact that EU does not like Russia, at least Putin, and you have EU leaders on record saying Russia needs to be split into pieces, and several statements like that, which are very inciting to the to Kremlin and Russian administration. So this, I think, is one of the reasons why it's kind of difficult to say we're going to get anything concrete anytime soon, unless they are both willing to meet in the middle and have concessions. Well, both sides don't seem to want to do that right now, except for the US particularly.
Right, and let's talk about those sanctions. Don't you think it may be productive to lift those sanctions right now?
I mean, if you look at the situation on ground, that's in the war. Currently, Russia has gained the upper hand despite the sanctions. So you might also be tempted to think that if you do ease those sanctions, because as you rightly said, when the United States released their statement about having a ceasefire done at the Riyadh summit, then you have the Kremlin officials coming out and saying the ceasefire will only be agreed to if certain economic sanctions are taken off the table. So this goes to show that Russia is also in need of levity in this case, where they need these sanctions removed. And so I'm willing to bet that Russia, willing to look the other way, at least reduce, or at least willing to come to the negotiating table if these sanctions are reduced. Because if force doesn't seem to work, perhaps dialogue and diplomacy might work in this case.
And President Volodymyr Zelensky has called Russia out, on these conditions for beginning the ceasefire. Many seem to think that the Russian government is stalling. It really doesn't want a ceasefire, even though that of the Black Sea has been agreed. Why is that?
Well, as I said earlier, the case or the issue still goes back to what Russia feels it's an existential threat. If you look at what Russia is currently requesting of Ukraine, is basically a capitulation. Russia is asking Ukraine to demilitarize, reduce its military force, just make sure it is no longer a threat, or it can no longer serve as a threat to Russian sovereignty. So in a case, I mean, if you look at it just strategically, waiting out for Russia is going to be the good thing right now, because they are gaining the upper hand already, and the Ukrainian resolve is thinning out. So the more Russia delays or waits, the better hand they have at negotiating. I think some of the cabinet members in Trump administration have also rightly pointed out that the earlier they get this ceasefire on the table, or like get it done, the better, because Russia is in a stronger position now. Had it been they agreed to a ceasefire about 6 to 8 months ago, about a year, Russia would have less leverage, and they have more now. So it's in Russia's interest to, delay and stall, so they have more leverage to negotiate. And I think that's what Russia is doing now.
Right, and it seems that the U.S. has no objections to Russia's demands. The Ukrainian President Zelensky says he is hoping the U.S. stands strong in the face of these Russian demands. Do you think the U.S. is capable of this?
Yes. So, as Henry Kissinger once said, he said it is to be America's enemy is wrong. I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember exactly how I said it, but he also said, but to be America's ally is even much more deadly or much more futile. And I think that's what happened to Ukraine now. So going back to Henry Kissinger, he had this three-way policy, foreign policy of dealing with nations. So there's a historical antecedent for what we are seeing right now. So if you go back to the 1970s, where we had the US and Soviet Union at loggerheads, so the Soviet Union and China had, they were very close together and they had a lot of good relations. And so what Henry Kissinger did then was to get close to the Soviets, to China against the Soviet Union to break their unity, because Henry Kissinger or the US knows well that when your enemies align, they get stronger. So what I think Trump is trying to do today is to separate Russia and China, because currently Russia and China have like the biggest alliance in the world. They since 2023, I believe, for example, Russia has exported about 70% of its products to China and imported about 40%, excuse me, and imported about 30%. So they've become the largest trading partner of China. Russia providing the natural resources as a land that has all these resources, and China being the economic powerhouse that has kept Russia afloat despite all these sanctions. So the United States rightly recognizes that China and Russia being the biggest threats to its hegemony in the world, it recognizes that them coming together is going to be a major challenge for US hegemony. And so it seeks to keep them apart by countering to Russia and listening to Putin's whims and demands, trying to get Putin away from China. And I think that's what we are seeing right now unfold in this conflict.
Right, geopolitical analyst Ibrahim Baban today. Thank you again for sharing your thoughts with us on the world today.
You're welcome. Glad.
Away from the Russia-Ukraine war, U.S. President Donald Trump has announced new import taxes of 25% on cars and car parts into his country. President Trump says the latest tariffs would come into effect on April 2, with charges on businesses importing vehicles starting the next day, while taxes on parts are set to start in May or later. He adds that the measure would lead to tremendous growth for the industry, promising it will spur jobs and investment. The White House says the order applies not only to finished cars, but also to car parts, which are often shipped from other countries before assembly. Responding to this, Germany has said it will not give in and that Europe must respond firmly as U.S. President Donald Trump targets imported cars and car parts with a 25% tax in his latest tariffs. Other major world economies have vowed to retaliate, with France branding the move very bad news, Canada calling it a direct attack, and China accusing Washington of violating international trade rules. Early on Thursday, shares in Frankfurt for Porsche, Mercedes and BMW fell sharply alongside French firm Stellantis, the maker of Jeep, Peugeot and Fiat. Mr. Trump has threatened to impose far larger tariffs if Europe works with Canada to do what he describes as economic harm to the U.S. Meanwhile, Mexico has criticized U.S. decision to impose 25% tariffs on Venezuelan oil and gas consumers. President Claudia Sheinbaum says Mexico does not agree with imposing sanctions on countries, as this is a matter of Mexican foreign policy. According to her, these measures don't just affect a government or an individual, they impact an entire people. The Mexican president also emphasized that international disputes must be resolved through diplomacy and dialogue, not through the imposition of coercive measures. Ms. Sheinbaum adds that her government is prepared for the reciprocal tariffs that Donald Trump has vowed to impose on all countries that maintain duties on U.S. products. And still to come on the program. South Sudan's vice president under house arrest as his party says this collapses the 2018 peace deal that ended a 5-year civil war. Details soon. Welcome back. U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has visited the high-security El Salvador prison where Venezuelans who the Trump administration alleges are gang members have been held since their removal from the United States. The tour included 2 crowded cell blocks, the armory, and an isolation unit. Her trip to the prison, where inmates are packed into cells and never allowed outside, comes as the Trump administration seeks to show its deportation people it describes it's deporting people it describes as the worst of the worst. The Trump administration is arguing in federal court that it was justified in sending the Venezuelans to El Salvador, while activists say officials have sent them to a prison rife with human rights abuses while presenting little evidence that they were part of the Venezuelan gang. Ms. Noem toured an area holding some of the Venezuelans accused of being gang members. In the sweltering building, the men in white T-shirts and shorts stared silently from their cells. Then they were heard shouting an indiscernible chant when she left. Elsewhere, Armenia will not be able to sit on 2 chairs and will have to choose between the Eurasian Economic Union and the European Union. This is according to Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Overchuk. Earlier, members of the Armenian parliament passed in the second and final reading a bill on starting the process of the republic's accession to the EU. Mr. Overchuk adds that Armenia will have to leave the Eurasian Economic Union and lose economic benefits provided by the Russian-led trade bloc if it keeps trying to join the European Union. Armenian officials say that Yerevan has no plans yet to leave the trade bloc, comprising 5 ex-Soviet states. They maintain that the one-sentence bill presented by Moscow does not amount to an EU membership bid. No EU member state has officially voiced support for Armenia's eventual membership in the 27-nation bloc, nor has the EU's executive body, the European Commission, welcomed the Armenian bill passed amid Yerevan's unprecedented rift with Moscow.
Our relations.
I think, Excellency, we've, since this interaction has come up, I do think we have moved from strength to strength. And as you heard from Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, he wants a sort of a quantum jump, not an incremental approach. And you know him well by now, right?
Yeah,
so,
right.
And that's how it is.
Both our countries are working towards improving our continent, Eurasia, and we see it as a prosperous place. And of course, then shortly afterwards, the visit of Prime Minister Mishustin and his meetings in Islamabad, all that has created a very good momentum for developing our relationship. And then the meetings that followed, as you said, we had an exchange in the energy sector, and there are projects there that are being discussed.
Elsewhere in Europe, the Polish government has temporarily suspended the right of migrants arriving in the country via its border with Belarus to apply for asylum. Prime Minister Donald Tusk announced that the suspension will take effect after the controversial bill, which allows Polish authorities to suspend this right for up to 60 days at a time. This was signed into law by President Andrzej Duda. Mr. Tusk had earlier stated that the bill would be adopted without delay, while President Duda argued that the changes were necessary to strengthen security on the country's borders. However, the law has been criticized by rights groups, including Human Rights Watch, which suggests that the EU should take legal action against Poland if it's implemented. Elsewhere, firefighters are racing to save people and ancient artifacts from the largest wildfires in South Korea's history, which have killed at least 27 people so far. Tens of thousands have also been displaced in the blazes, which started in the southeast on March 21. Most of those killed are in their 60s and 70s. Eyewitnesses described apocalyptic scenes as fires engulfed their homes, with one man telling of the damage in a city as devastating. Authorities believe human activity started multiple fires, but strong winds and dry land allowed them to spread quickly. The winds also make it dangerous for helicopters to operate. One crashed while fighting the fires on Tuesday. The fires have gutted a 1,300-year-old temple in Uisong City and are threatening other cultural sites. Well, a tourist bus has plunged into the Po River in Turin on Thursday, resulting in the death of a driver and injuries to 3 pedestrians. Footage captured at the scene near Piazza Vittorio Veneto shows emergency services working to pull the bus from the river. Officials say the operations were conducted naturally with great balance and with the delicacy that both this place and the technical operations required. The incident took place around 17:30 local time when the bus operated by Di Carlo Tours reportedly struck a stone railing on the Murazi before plummeting into the Po River. Nicola Di Carlo, the 64-year-old driver, was recovered by emergency responders but died despite efforts by them to revive him. 3 pedestrians, all women, were injured by the bus before it fell into the river. They were taken to the CTO hospital with no serious injuries. Police closed off the area surrounding Piazza Vittorio Veneto and the Vittoria Emanuele I bridge to facilitate emergency services operations. In Egypt, at least 6 people are feared dead after a tourist submarine sank into the Red Sea. Several people have been injured and 29 others rescued from the incident off the Egyptian city of Hurghada early on Thursday. Around 40 passengers were on board the submarine. And according to Moscow's embassy in Egypt, all are believed to be Russian. The boat, called Sinbad, sank close to the harbor. Back in November, tourist boats called the Sea Story sank in Hurghada, leaving 11 people dead or missing and 35 survivors. Well, tensions remain high in South Sudan as the opposition party says the 2018 peace deal in the country has collapsed. The Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition adds that the detention of South Sudan's first Vice President Riek Machar has effectively collapsed the peace deal that ended the country's 5-year civil war. Late on Wednesday, an armed convoy led by top security officials, including the defense minister, entered Mr. Machar's residence in the capital, Juba, and disarmed his bodyguards. Mr. Machar is now under house arrest, detained alongside his wife, Angelina, who is the country's interior minister. The UN has been warning that South Sudan is on the brink of a return to civil war following an escalation of conflict between Mr. Machar and President Salva Kiir, although the president said he will never return the country to war. The two leaders agreed in August 2018 to end the civil war that killed nearly 400,000 people, but over the last 7 years, their relationship has become increasingly strained amid ethnic tensions and sporadic violence. In South Africa's Deputy Minister of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, Sizo Mogai, has highlighted the crucial role of academia and civil society in shaping policies that align with G20 priorities. Speaking at the G20 seminar currently underway in Johannesburg, he emphasized that their involvement is key to addressing challenges in integrating G20 priorities into South Africa's development strategies. The seminar focused on public good, development, finance, and social protection, serves as a platform to educate, inform, and engage stakeholders on the significance of the G20 during South Africa's presidency.
So we say that development should not be just confined be a confinement narrowly of government, but citizenry, active citizenry is important to ensure and shape our development agenda in the country. Currently in South Africa, we're talking about triple ills, that there's high level of unemployment, there's prevalence of poverty, and also there is inequality, which is very high in our country. So we have to look into these issues. What are the chronic problems around areas of economic growth? What are the challenges that relates to financing of our ambitious plan, particularly in the rolling out of the infrastructure? Hence, specializing institutions like Development Bank of South Africa, DBSA, are among also of stakeholders that play a key role to ensure that we shape our development.
We'll get back to that story in a moment to get more on it. In the meantime, Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has removed his army chief amid the coup speculations in the country. A statement from the presidency says Anselm Sanyatibwe had been retired and reassigned to head the sports docket as sports minister. The sports vacancy became available this month after Kirsty Coventry was elected president of the International Olympic Committee. Sanyatibwe's removal as army chief comes at a time of increased political sparring ahead of general elections set for 2028. Analysts say President Mnangagwa appears to be acting to shield himself from a potential mutiny. A section of cadres of the ruling ZANU-PF party want Constantino Chiwenga, that's Mr. Mnangagwa's deputy, who removed Robert Mugabe in 2017 to take over as president. In recent months, he has also shuffled the heads of police and intelligence service. In the meantime, President Mnangagwa has congratulated Kirsty Coventry, the newly elected president of the International Olympic Committee. He officially relieved Ms. Coventry of her duties as Zimbabwe's sports minister during an event, as the 41-year-old will take up her new position as Olympic head in June. Ms. Coventry made history by becoming the first female president of the first African president of the IOC, following a secret ballot held in Costa Navarino. The seven-time Olympic medalist secured a commanding 51% victory in the first round of voting, outperforming 6 other contenders.
I want to congratulate Dr. Kirsty Coventry. She has made us proud, my little girl. She has made us proud. Congratulations.
Now let's get back to our story on South Africa. The South African government, through the Department of Social Development, in partnership with the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, will host the biannual Africa Children's Summit in April 2025 in Johannesburg. This event, known as the Africa Children's Summit 2025, aims to amplify the voices of children across the continent, ensuring their active participation in shaping their future. The summit will bring together 1,300 children from all 5 African regions to discuss pressing issues affecting their well-being. As part of the lead-up to this important gathering, we are joined by Bathembu Futshane, Acting Chief Director, Communications, Department of Social Development, to discuss the significance of this initiative. Thank you for joining us on the program. Right, so what are the key objectives of the summit?
Well, there's quite a number of them, but the ones that are of significance to us, as well as of significance also to the children. One is that we want to promote child-centered advocacy and dialogue. What we mean by that, the theme of the summit is that children are seen and children are heard. And the essence of that theme is that we want to ensure that we're placing children at the center of their stories. We want children to be the ones who are architects of solutions that are made in their name. To steal a phrase, nothing without us, nothing about us without us. And we're taking that phrase and we're changing it and making it suitable for students by saying that objective number one is to ensure that we're ensuring that there's advocacy for children and that there's dialogue. And this is an opportunity for them to summit, for them to engage in that particular dialogue. Secondly, we want to empower children to become agents of change. And by that, again, we mean that they are becoming agents of their own change, that no longer are we, as policymakers, no longer are we, as government, no longer are we, society, are the ones who are determining the future trajectory of children, how children are experiencing the realities of their lives. We want to ensure that there's inclusive participation and also equitable participation in the program. One of the things that are outstanding, especially if we look at the socioeconomic disparities that we have on our continent, inclusivity is one of the issues that we are battling to ensure that is happening, but also equitability. We come from countries and dispensations where there are great disparities between the rich and the poor, between those that live in urban areas and those that live in rural areas, between those that are able and those that are disabled, and also between those that have access to good education and those that don't have access to great education. And we want to give a platform to all children where they all are equal, where they're all treated inclusively and equitably, but also that they start to determine for themselves policies that we as government and as policymakers are going to implement that are going to ensure inclusivity and equitability.
Right.
We want to ensure that we promote evidence-based policy making. And by that, we mean that we have invited children from all spectrums of life, including children that come from situations of inequities, wherein they are exposed to violence, they are exposed to war, they are exposed to sexual assault and other social ills. And we want to ensure that we take advantage of those lived experiences and use those as evidence towards crafting policies that are going to be more beneficial to these particular children, and ensure that what the place that they're coming from are improved for them. Finally, we want to ensure that we strengthen collaboration across all the sectors. And by that we mean, one is ensure that we strengthen collaboration between government and NGO sector, but also government to government. The summit has invited children from all 5 regions of Africa, deliberately because we want to ensure that we're strengthening collaboration between all of those 5 regions as part of the objective to ensure that we are increasing collaboration between sectors, but also between government and policymakers, government and NGO sector, and in certain instances also quite critically between government and the private sector, which is also a key player and key role player in how children are raised and how children become adults and future leaders in our society.
Right, and bringing together 1,300 children from across Africa, you said all the 5 regions, is quite a significant undertaking. How will the selection process ensure this diverse representation?
Well, at the core of our selection and at the core of the program are 2 very, very important principles. The first principle is inclusivity, and the second principle is that of ensuring that we give reality to lived experiences. And that has guided, my apologies, someone has just sent me something on my phone, but that has guided how we have gone about ensuring that we select these children. So we have looked at children from diverse backgrounds. We have looked at children from the age group of 10 until the age group of 17, because that is the most critical development age. And we want to ensure that we look at children from that are living with disabilities. We're looking at children that come from rural backgrounds, that come from marginalized backgrounds. We look at children that have got lived experience, I said, of systemic challenges, such as violence, such as hunger and famine, such as education inequities, children that come from war-torn situations. And we wanted to bring all of these children with all of this variety of realities and backgrounds, but also variety of lived experiences, because we know that that diversity of lived experience is going to ensure that we get a rich tapestry of policy positions coming out of that. And so that has been the key to our selection criteria, that one, we ensure that there's inclusivity, and two, that we are focused on bringing forth and making reality, or at least drawing their reality out of these children's lived experiences.
Right. We do thank you for your time again. Acting Chief Director at Communications Department of Social Development in South Africa. A pleasure having you again on the program.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you.
And still to come. Cherry Blossom Park in southwest China unveils a breathtaking display welcoming spring season. Welcome back. Artificial intelligence is reshaping the world, and Nigeria is no exception. The country is positioning itself to take a share of this blooming industry, with young innovators leading the charge. But many of them face a major challenge: access to the training and support needed to turn their ideas into reality. In this next report, we take you into the world of young innovators who are leveraging AI to solve real-world challenges, and the government-backed initiatives stepping in to bridge the skill gap. Take a listen.
Meet Harun Adebaki, one of the young innovators tackling a life-threatening issue, cervical cancer. His AI-powered model, Detect, aims to speed up cervical cancer screening, making early detection more accessible and efficient.
What my solution is actually aiming to tackle is the time that is required for a pathologist to look into pap smear slides. So the pap smear test is actually the standard procedure for cervical cancer screening, and it takes a pathologist on average 5 to 15 minutes to actually screen a patient's pap smears. And so we thought about it. How about we actually use AI to streamline the workflow and make it more efficient? And that's what we're trying to do with Detect.
In classrooms, AI is also making a difference. St. Mark Adebayo, through Efiko Study Buddy, an advanced AI-powered tutor, is helping students like himself learn at their own pace, providing interactive, real-time responses.
I built Efiko so that students such as myself will have access to interactive learning platforms where they can get simpler explanations to courses and concepts.
From saving lives to improving education and media, AI is proving to be a game changer. But there's a problem. While ideas like this have the potential to drive real change, for many young innovators, building a solution is just the beginning. Computing power, access to data, and even scaling it, those are the real challenges. Take Saeed Aziz, the mind behind Yarn GPT, an AI text-to-speech model designed to speak with a Nigerian accent. It has the potential to bridge the communication gap, to make AI more accessible to millions of Nigerians.
Data and computing power, because training these models require like GPUs, and I don't have access to a GPU. I'm GPU poor, and paying for that GPU service costs money. I think I spent about like maximum of $200 of GPU on the whole thing. And apart from that, another source of challenge, maybe minor, was like internet data, because I always have to be like active. I remember buying data and I was like, hope I'm not spending too much on data like this. Yes, and also another challenge I can also mention is the fact that access to power, electricity. I had to be going to my dad's office to actually work on the project. At home, there is no too much power. Where I stay is one day on, one day off.
And here's why the AI skills gap matters. The AI industry isn't just growing, it's exploding. According to Precedence Research, the global AI market is projected to hit $757.58 billion in 2025 and skyrocket to $3.68 trillion by 2034. And right here in Nigeria, Statista projects that our AI market will grow from $1.4 billion in 2025 to $4.6 billion by 2030, a massive 27.16% annual growth rate. But these aren't just numbers. They represent the real economic opportunities AI can bring.
Let's close the program now with this beautiful story as Guyan Cherry Blossom Park, nestled in southwest China's picturesque Guizhou province, has unveiled its most breathtaking display as 700,000 cherry blossom trees burst into full bloom, transforming the landscape into a sea of pink and white. Drone footage captures the beauty of the blossoms, which wind along scenic roads, cluster around lakes, and stretch across rolling hills, creating an ethereal springtime spectacle. The park, spanning 1,600 hectares, features over 100 islands blanketed in cherry blossoms. The annual flower viewing season runs from March to April, beginning with vibrant red cherry blossoms before giving way to pale pink and white varieties. The spectacle speaks with the delicate pink cherry blossoms that mark the final phase of the blooming cycle, drawing thousands of visitors. Beyond its stunning display, the Cherry Blossom Park has become a key destination for ecotourism and cultural festivals, attracting photographers, nature lovers, and festival goers to celebrate the arrival of spring. What's beauty to behold? And that's how we close the world today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.